Welcome back to Gateway of Atonement. It's so wonderful to have you here. We're here with some of my good friends to complete Chapter 10. And today, there was a laugh. You're my best friend. How is that a laugh? Yeah, we're good friends. Yes. Good. You should be friends to learn together, and if you're not, you should become friends when you learn together. So today we're going to teach and learn that Shabbat, the secret meaning of Shabbat is actually return. And that the word itself, if you look at it deeply, means return. So at the end of this class, you will understand really the higher level of Shabbat, how it relates to God and creation, and why the whole idea of Shabbat is that of return and connects exactly to the Kabbalistic approach to atonement that we've been learning about. Stay tuned. Before that, we want to cover one more topic, and then the end of Chapter 10 will get us to the topic of Shabbat being returned. And to catch everyone up where we are, we've learned two stages of the Kabbalistic approach to atonement, to tshuva. It's a lower and a higher, corresponding to the two heys that are in God's name. So the final hey is what we're working on with lower tshuva, and then the second letter of God's name, that upper hey, that's the idea of upper level of tshuva. Lower level of tshuva, the idea is I'm getting rid of my sins and returning my soul to factory settings. And I do that by genuinely apologizing and then breaking my heart a little by meditating on the effects of my life and my actions on my soul and on God's name. So in a nutshell, that's lower level tshuva. Lower level tshuva is associated with what kind of emotions? Like, how do you feel when you're doing lower level tshuva?
Remorseful.
Remorseful, very good. What else? Maybe bitter, don't be shy, right? You're certainly not happy, not dancing around. When you're looking back and saying, oh, I told this mistruth, or I did this thing, or I left out this important piece of my practice, you feel bad. It's associated with negative feelings. Tshuva ila'ah, the higher level of tshuva, now I've already finished tshuva tata. My sins have been cleaned out, so my drive is now set to factory settings, so to speak. There's no fragmentation. And now, as we learned, by learning Torah and doing mitzvahs with awe and love, I can actually get to a state where I'm not just back to the way my soul was when I was born, factory settings. I can leap up to a state of oneness with God before I was even put into a body, which has its own limitations. So if God breathed our souls into us, we can now move back and be like that breath before God exhaled it. Still part of God, total oneness with God. That's tshuva ila'ah. And then we learned at the beginning of this chapter that there's even another level of higher tshuva, which is, when I learn Torah and do mitzvahs, I'm now channeling God, so to speak, in all of my soul's garments, all my soul's powers. But it really is happening based on God's level. God's bringing that level of channeling down. It's not because of who I am or my identity. It's because when you learn Torah with love and awe, that is connecting with God, and God's oneness comes into my being, so to speak. So how can we now raise ourselves up and bring tshuva ila'ah into who I am? That is through prayer. Through prayer. Because prayer does that work where now I'm developing my own love and awe through my own initiative. And now through prayer, I can do tshuva ila'ah again, but now it's because of who I am, not because of who God is. Right, so the whole idea of prayer is the theme of tshuva ila'ah. And we should know when we pray, we can experience that level. That should be the work we're doing if we're aiming at that. Now we're going to take care of one additional element that the Alter Rebbe wants to clarify, and then we'll get into Shabbat. So we'll start at the top of page 276. This is volume 3 of this edition of Lessons in Tanya. Dan, why don't you start, and we'll go around. I'll read Hebrew. Umeachar she'atfilah hi b'chinat tshuva ila'ah.
Since prayer is an expression of teshuva ilah, the higher level of return.
Right, so we just learned prayer is tshuva ila'ah, where we get our mitzias, our actual selves, in sync and we become holy and suitable for this, so we can be a vessel, keli, for this infinite light that surrounds the world and can't enter the world. It's an amazing level. Prayer turns me into that kind of vessel done properly. If prayer is tshuva ila'ah, what's one of the fundamental things we learned 3-4 chapters ago about the order of tshuva tata, lower tshuva, and tshuva ila'ah, higher tshuva? Can you just work on either, or one has to come first?
Lower has to come first.
Lower has to come first. And of course, the last Chabad Rebbe said our generation works on tshuva ila'ah, so don't take that as literal law. In our generation, especially after the Holocaust, you can just focus on tshuva ila'ah, and that's the idea of our generation. But in general, it should be followed by some kind of tshuva tata. So if prayer is tshuva ila'ah, shouldn't it have some kind of tshuva tata before it? Right? Shouldn't it, when you get up to pray, where's the tshuva tata that allows you to express that level of tshuva ila'ah? Tzarich lakdim lefanecha bechinat tshuva tata.
It must be preceded by teshuva tata, the lower level of return that is reached by the contriteness of a penitent heart.
Right, so if I'm going to come to Friday night services and prayer, I'm going to get up and say the Shema in the morning. Okay, it's tshuva ila'ah, but I need some tshuva tata beforehand, the Alter Rebbe is saying. V'zeu she'amru. So now we're going to have a few different quotes, and like the Alter Rebbe often does, he's going to set up a question which seems like a paradox, and then he's going to solve it for us. V'zeu she'amru rabbeinu zivchanam livracha b'mishnah. Ein omdin litpalel ela mitoch koved rosh.
This is what the sages intended in the Mishnah. One should embark on worship only in an earnest frame of mind.
Right, so there's this rule that you can't just get up and pray and just knock it out and then move on. I mean, okay, sometimes you're having a bad day and you just got to fit in. You don't want to not do it, so maybe sometimes you would. But ideally, as a rule, you want to be in a state that's called koved rosh, so heaviness of head, right? And what that means, Rashi will learn translated as hakna'ah, which is like brokenness, humility. So koved rosh, on the one hand, means seriousness. Right? I get up to pray. I should be in a state where I'm all in. I'm taking this seriously. I'm going deep. But there's more than that. Koved rosh also means I'm aware of my shortcomings and it's affecting me. Right? I'm in a state of emotional accountability, and my mind is really taking that in. Right? So, okay, let's really own up to what's going on here. That's koved rosh, and a little bit of, it's going to be hard because I recognize I'm not lying to myself about my record over the past day or week. Make sense? Broken humility. Uferish? Yeah. Uferish Rashi Hachna. Rashi says Hachna v'hi b'chinat tshuva tata. This is a state of tshuva tata. Le'orer rachamim kaniskar la'el. Go ahead to, in which?
In which one arouses divine compassion for oneself, as noted above in chapters 7 and 8.
Right, so this makes sense because tshuva tata was the idea of taking stock and negative emotions and humility and brokenness. So if the Alter Rebbe is saying, okay, you get up to pray, that's tshuva ila'ah. You're going to lift yourself up to a level where you can be a vessel for the light that surrounds the world that otherwise couldn't even relate to the world, an incredible level. So beforehand, you need to have some contriteness and koved rosh, a little brokenness, and that'll do it. But there's a problem with that, which we'll say. So we're still going on the bitter spirit. There's one more quote. V'chid yalif hatam b'gemara mikra dichtiv v'hi marat nefesh.
This the Talmud infers from a phrase which states with regard to
Chana, one more.
Yeah.
she was bitter of spirit and she prayed to God.
So again, when Chana was praying, for children, Chana was like so bitter and weeping, right, that it looked like she was drunk, right? So from this we know that that's actually, you're supposed to be bitter spirit, have a sense of hakna, broken humility, of koved rosh. What's the problem? Achen, at the same time, ba'braita sham, tanu Rabbanan ein omdin להתפלל אלא מתוך simcha.
At the same time, we must note the Barita.
Baraita, yeah.
Barita there. Our sages taught one should embark on worship only with joy.
All right, now we have a problem, right? You have to be in a state of joy to stand and worship, right? So now what, right?
That seems like an oxymoron, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a contradiction for sure.
Because
Right?
most people would pray or ask for God when they're broken down and they broken down in spirit and sad or mad.
So you're saying you think naturally, like I have a catastrophe, I lose something, I turn to God, please God help me, right? That's the time I'd naturally pray. It's true. Keep in mind, however, there's a practice of prayer where you get up in the morning and pray, and you get up on the most amazing day in the world, and you're also getting up to pray, right? So prayer as a regular practice, I don't think this barisa probably applies least when my house is on fire and I pray, please God save my children, God forbid, right? So probably there you're not required to stop and become in a state of joy. It's more talking about like regular prayer. You get up and it's like, I say the Shema in the morning. I could just phone it in, or I could really get myself excited. I'm about to meet God, right? God cares about me, and I'm going to have a conversation with God, and I'm going to bring down blessings, and I'm excited. And so the best way to pray is by getting myself in a state where, amazing, look at what's about to happen, and I'm going to go have a great time connecting with God, because why not?
But if you're in a state of mourning, how
Yeah.
can you be in a state of joy to pray?
Yeah, so a state of mourning is also a different situation, I'd say. So every rule that we have has situations where you're going to temper that rule. Mourning obviously is another one. But let's just have the conversation in terms of neutral prayer. Say I wake up, it's your normal average day, and now I have the question. I get to decide what state I'm going to be in. And the Alter Rebbe is saying before prayer, I should break my heart a little to do tshuva tata, lower tshuva, and that's going to let me do the tshuva ilah in prayer. So that's the ideal to aim at, whatever else is going on. Or is it the exact opposite? I should get up and I should say, oh, I'm going to pray. Let's get myself excited. Let's get happy. Let's sing a song. Maybe dance with my minyan a little. Like let's get it freilich so that we can pray, right? So, catastrophes or mourning, God forbid, notwithstanding, what's the ideal here? Even the simple ideal seems like it's a contradiction. Agreed?
This is maintenance, basically. The daily prayer would be maintenance for your soul.
You can think of it as maintenance. You can think of it as your supply of
preventive
spiritual life
maintenance.
for the day. Yeah, however you go. Yeah. So, how do we solve this? ועכשיו, בדור יתום הזה שאין הכל יכולים להפוך ליבם כרגע מן הקצה.
In our bereaved generation, however, when not all are capable of turning their hearts instantly from one extreme to the other, from humility to joy.
So what's going on here? There's a few points. So apparently, this state of getting up and first breaking my heart and having a sense of humility and brokenness, and then just flipping the coin and starting to pray and being in a state of joy was easier in earlier generations, right? He says, Achshav bedor yatom hazeh, in this orphan generation. So what does this mean? There's an idea in Kabbalah we've talked about, which goes contrary to scientific thinking right now. Right, scientific thinking, we think that we evolved from lower creatures, and that as you go further back in time, you're closer and closer to this lower creature, which is less intelligent. Right? And we think of ourselves as being more evolved through time. The Torah sees it very differently. It says everything that was closer to creation was full of the initial energy of creation, full of very vibrant energy. And humanity, in fact, is creating a whole being, one being. And those first generations were the brain and the heart. These are really, and that's why, by the way, they live for 500, 800, 900 years, right? You look at that and just some strange thing where like they couldn't keep records, or like, how are they living for 950 years, right? They had this incredible energy where that was their lifespan, right? That's the reason you look at it. And in Judaism, as you go down through the generations, you're actually getting weaker and weaker energy because it's sort of running out. And in terms of the being we're now creating like the soles of the feet and the toenails, which is not the same kind of cells as my brain cells and my heart cells. So in general, it's understood that each generation is less spiritually powerful than the one that preceded it. And my great-great-great-great-great-grandparents were that many generations closer to Moses and Adam, not that many generations further away from a monkey or an ape, right? So first understand that they understood that the level of the people in the Alter Rebbe's time was not the same level as the ones that wrote these Baisas. And us as well, we're also in a lower level than them. So it may be that we just don't have the intellectual, emotional integration to do this. Second, when he says in our bereaved generation, that could be poetic, but he's also referring to when you're it actually means, Bedor Yatom means an orphaned generation. So when you're orphaned, you've lost who? Parents, right? So if your parents are a father and a mother, classically, what do the father and the mother represent in Kabbalah? Always Chokhmah and Bina, right? Chokhmah and Bina. So wisdom and understanding, that is called father and mother. It's more classical Kabbalistic terms. I don't use it often, right? But
You've never used it before.
Yeah.
I've never said this before.
Right.
It's possible. It's possible.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
That we remember.
Okay. So I try. You're right. I do. In my mind, I try to avoid it, not confuse things. I just call it Chokhmah and Bina. But like in the world of Partsufim, of like personalities and faces in Kabbalah, they're also referred to as a father and a mother, and there's like a consort. There's all kinds of. There's a whole world out there. So let me say for the very first time, use this guide for this whole series.
The source, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but it makes sense.
Yeah.
And every emotion has parents. Those parents gave birth to those emotions. The emotions are the children of the father and the mother, which is your intellect. So what I focus on intellectually, that will give birth to children, right? So if we are an orphan generation, it means we've lost Kabbalistically what a father and mother means? Chokhmah and Bina. So we don't have the, what's that?
Now we know the answer.
Nice! We've learned this already, right? 3 minutes ago. So the idea of the Chokhmah and Bina of the earlier generations, they call it a big mind. If you have a large intellect, if you have an integrated, extended intellect, is it possible to look at something or someone and have two emotions at the same time?
I think so.
Of course it is, right? Sure. So, take politicians, right? I might see a politician, I love them on this issue, I hate them on this issue, right? Take relatives, right? I love them, they're my family, they frustrate me because of X, right? And if you have a big mind, you're not confused. You can have complex, multiple emotions, you can hold it all at the same time, the bigger your mind. A child is just going to feel one thing at a time. I love you, Daddy, you're so nice, you gave me a lollipop, or you're the meanest daddy in the world. Right? They're not going to have two emotions at once because they have a small mind. So what he's saying is, in past generations, they actually could. They could crush themselves and have a sense of bitterness and then flip right away and also have a sense of joy because they could really hold those two in a different way than we can with their more integrated Chokhmah and Bina. In our generation...
So we're the bereaved generation right now?
Well, his generation was. This was
Imagine what ours
1800s, right? So now we're 7 generations even beyond that, 8 generations.
So we're not talking about the Holocaust. That was when
He was before the Holocaust. Yeah. So what's his advice? The solution to this issue that we can't be both sad and happy at the same time, and we're commanded to be happy during prayer, and yet we want to break our hearts before prayer. Azai etze hayutza lahakdim b'chinat tshuvatata b'tikun chatzot kaniskar la'el. I think Stuart, perhaps.
It is advised that the Teshuva Tata be practiced earlier at Tikkun
Chatzot.
Chatzot. This is an especially appropriate time for the spiritual stock-taking that leads to the humility of a broken and contrite heart, as noted above.
Right, so Tikkun Chatzot is a earlier liturgy that was done in the middle of the night. So like right when you'd go to sleep when the sun set, and you'd sleep for probably 5.5 hours. You'd wake up at 12:31 in the morning, and you'd do this Tikkun Chatzot, and it was a very penitential prayer liturgy. It was long, and then you'd start learning Torah, and then you'd start your day and you'd pray. Right, so actually, even in the Orthodox community, I don't believe it's widely practiced anymore by anyone. But what's advised now is we just do it at the bedtime Shema. So, like for someone like us, if we wanted to practice this, the Alter Rebbe is saying, okay, if you got commandment to be joyful and a requirement to also break your heart, and if now we can't have them right next to each other, which one's going to win? Always joy. Always joy. Because in Judaism and in Hasidus in particular, joy is always the most important of the two, the most powerful. So if one of them has to go, we're not going to put off joy till mincha. We're going to move the brokenness to the night before, and then use that to make this into tshuva ilah. Right? That'll be our lower tshuva, so that now prayer in the morning can be just about joy. Make sense? ומי שאי אפשר לו בכל לילה, על כל פנים לא יפחות מפעם אחת בשבוע לפני יום שבת.
Whoever cannot do this nightly should maintain an absolute minimum of once every week before the Shabbat.
So if you can't get up at midnight and do this lengthy penitential prayer, then at least do it once a week. And when? The night before Shabbat. So Thursday night, usually Tikkun Chatzot, and now we're going to get into the topic of Shabbat. So again, for us, this is the bedtime Shema. So I do not suggest that anyone watching go look up Tikkun Chatzot and find it online and get up at 1 a.m. and make a practice of reciting that. If you want to incorporate this in our practice, it can be simple as sitting in your bed before you go to sleep, reciting the Shema, the V'ahavta. There's longer liturgies, but just that is an excellent start in practice. And when you do it, go over in particular the day, go over in particular, if you could look neutrally and objectively at everything I thought, said, and did. What were the low points? Right? What were the errors and mistakes where I missed who I'd want to be? Do I need to apologize to anyone tomorrow for that? Really go through and take stock. And force myself to look and focus and picture the impact of my actions, the opposite of what we like to do. We like to think about the great things that happened and what we feel good about. We want to turn that upside down and really sit and focus deeply on my failings. And that should naturally make you feel upset or broken. And sit with that and let the bedtime Shema be a moment of that. And it could be 2 minutes, it could be 15 minutes, it could be 20 minutes. And then allow that, picture that as the tshuva tata that's going to allow your morning practice, whatever you do when you get up, washing hands, modeh ani, the Shema, that will allow that to be a moment of joy, of now reconnecting with God on a higher level of tshuva ilah. Any questions on that one topic of how we do tshuva tata before prayer?
Let me just repeat what you said. At the nighttime Shema, you should reflect on the shortcomings of the day. And the Shema in the morning should reflect on the joy of the day.
Exactly. Joy of connecting with God. Yeah.
You said you do that Thursday night rather than Friday night then?
Yeah, Friday, as we'll learn on Friday night, it's Shabbat already. You don't do any penitential, mournful Shabbat's not for that, and we'll go into that. Yeah. But the bedtime Shema you do every night. Like he's saying, if you can't do Tikkun Chatzot, which is like an hour long, very, very heavy liturgy that's really, really should depress you. It's a very depressing liturgy, right? It's like
Good way to fall asleep.
Look, horses just fall asleep standing or whatever. Like a human being should fall asleep having cleaned up their day. So really, that is the mindful way of going to sleep is like clearing the slate, right? That it really. The times when I'm doing it better, I do think you sleep better, you're healthy, you wake up refreshed. I'd rather do that than sit and just, sort of go over in my mind the moments of the day I enjoyed the most that made me feel like I'm such a great person, and just kind of sweep the rest under the rug, because those will come up in your dreams, and those, So I actually do think it is a good way to go to sleep. But sorry, to finish, if you can't do that every night, do it once a night. But the bedtime Shema is not that. The bedtime Shema, I think, is a very, very good habit. Just the Shema V'ahavta, if you want, before you go to bed, that really should be every night. If you're doing it, there's no need to make it one night.
On a personal note, I find it just the opposite for me. When I go to sleep and I say my Shema, I think about what a great day this was and what I did, and I think about the good things. I don't think about the bad things for some reason. Maybe I should start.
And now you know.
Because you're not Jewish enough. Then.
It's a suggestion, and not bad things like "woe is me," something bad happened to me, right?
Yeah.
Oh, somebody stole my wallet. It was such a bad day. Bad things like I could have done this better. I intended to learn more Torah. I intended to spend more time with my kids. I intended to be less on Instagram or whatever. Like taking stock, right? I mean,
accepting responsibility.
You're very good at taking stock in your professional life, right? You make sure every line is taken care of, is organized, and so emotionally, like, I'm not saying you got to be crying when you go to sleep, but if there's something where I felt I should have done better,
Boy, what did I do?
I should have done better. And it's not guilt, right? It's not guilt. And we've gone through this. Guilt has no place in English. So it's not like, oh, I'm such a bad person, I'm so guilty. It's not that. I know that inside I'm a pure soul. And that's what tshuva is. I'm coming back to who I really am. But I've let that down. Superficially, I've made mistakes. And I want to be, I would try it for a few weeks and see what the impact is.
So if you say the Shemona Esrei, does that take you through the various stages from set you up for the day, so to speak?
The best metaphor that we have, I think, for the Shemona Esrei, the Amidah, the 18 / now 19 blessings that are the peak of the morning, and that's Tshuva, is that's a spine. So there were 18 blessings, and there's 18 vertebrae in our spine. And so as opposed to all the limbs and organs that make up the whole body, the Shemona Esrei is like the spine that everything rests on. So it gives structure and strength to all the rest of your practice. So I wouldn't say the Shemona Esrei takes you through everything. There's ways of looking at it where you can see that the Shemona Esrei is really the peak of our surrender to God joyfully in the morning service. That is like the spine that everything else is relying on. That work?
Yeah.
All right, let's go on. Shabbat. Now we're going to get to what I introduced at the beginning, the idea of Shabbat and how it connects to this. And I love this. I really meditated on this for several years after I learned it, as like it followed me around for a long time. Shabbat odiot tashev enosh.
Indeed, the very letters of the word Shabbat spell tashev, you return, as in the phrase, you cause man to return.
And I haven't seen this anywhere except in the Tanya. I'm sure somebody else has pointed it out. But here we have my handy whiteboard. So you can see
Dan
the word.
Dan can't see.
Oh,
So the word Shabbat with the sheen, bet, taf, right? Yeah, sheen, bet, taf. If I just take it and I just take the taf and move to the beginning, it becomes tashev. Tashev. So the same letters. And for those who haven't gone through the whole gematria thing, I know in English if you kind of rearrange a word for another word, you're like, oh, that's cute, but really you're just making a connection that's random because they might not be connected. In Judaism, language works like algorithms. And so if you have a letter or a root that connects, or if it's the same letters, it really does flow out of the same spiritual dynamic. It's a totally different thing. I don't want to go deep into it because we could talk the next 3 hours about it. But when you see that a letter actually is so close, that means that it really has a very close, meaningful connection. So Shabbat actually spells tashev, and tashev means return. Tashev enosh means return, oh human, oh man, right? So how is it that Shabbat is the idea of return. So we talked about this a few times. When God created the world and God was doing work, and then God stopped and God rested, so to speak, Shabbat v'nafash, why did God have to rest? Didn't have to. Right? Good answer. Right? So you tell it to a kid, and the kid's like, oh, if I work for 6 days, then the 7th day I'm tired, I need to rest and refresh myself. So that's what God had to do. But there is no such thing as God getting tired. There's no such thing as God needing rest. God creating the world was not really any energy or work or effort, and God created infinite worlds in 1 nanosecond without whatever, right? So obviously it doesn't mean that God got tired from working for 6 days, so God decided, okay, let me go relax now from all this work, right? So let's throw that idea out. So what does it mean? When God, and we talked about this in the last 2 weeks, let's go through. When God created the world, God did it through what action? We have spoken about this. Words. So God, fill in the blank, let there be light. What did God do?
Spoke.
God said, let there be light. So when God was created for 6 days, God used speech. Speech was the world exists at the level of God's speech. That's the life force of the world is God's speech. Speech is how I communicate to who?
The world, people?
Yeah, people around me. Now, when God went up and Shabbat and kind of withdrew from that level, now, what's the source of speech in ourselves? If I say something, it means I have what about it? Thought. So thought is the source of speech. Shabbat exists at the level of God's thought. And thought is how I communicate with who?
God.
Okay, God, but who else?
Yourself.
Myself.
Right. So I'm thinking to myself, that's my mind communicating with myself internally. That's me at my own level, my own identity. When I'm speaking, now I'm communicating to other people imperfectly and at the level of connecting to another. So the 6 days of the week, that's God relating to creation as if creation exists. That's God externally communicating. That's God moving out from God's natural status. In fact, we say it's like a king coming from a palace and going to fix a well in some faraway village, right? Okay, you heard there's a problem with this well. You're not going to leave the court and leave all your important duties to go personally fix this well. Just ask someone to send someone, it'll get done, right? So when God came and created this universe for 6 days, that was God leaving God's natural state. God was one, infinite, alone, then like now, above time, there's no then and now. And God's still that way. And yet for 6 days, God came and God spoke to something as if there's anything else, and God created a world as if the world exists. God was leaving God's natural state, just like I leave my natural identity when I speak. What happened on Shabbat? God's like, okay, that's done. Now I'm going to go back up to my level of thought, and the worlds rise up with God to that level. And that's the key. Now, during the 6 days of the week, the world exists at the level of speech, and then on Shabbat, every one of the worlds, the physical and the spiritual worlds, rise up and exist on the level of God's thought. And so now, the worlds are holy. The worlds are a mishkan, a tabernacle. And that's why for 6 days we go out and we work and we do mundane things. Yes, we pray, but we work and we take the world and we try to bring it into a state where we're going to do good things with it, elevate it into holiness. And we schlep all that, and then on Shabbat, it all rises up and we make it into a tabernacle, a holy place, a mishkan. So the idea of Shabbat is returning. The whole world returns to the level of God's thought. We ourselves return to the level of God's thought and breath and Shuva Ilah, however you want to look at it. And the whole idea of Shabbat is the same as returning. And that's why even the letters themselves, Shabbat, spells Tashev, spells return. Understood?
Interesting.
So for 6 days, God is relating to the world, and then on the 7th day, the way we relate to God is through Shabbat, right? Through
Yes.
That, yeah.
Yeah, and which is the idea
So it's a matter of
Shuva
relating.
Ilah, of higher level of
Yeah.
Right? Because if I'm now one with God's thought, I mean, we're not forget about, I'm a created being that's messed up, and you've wiped away my sins, and now I'm refreshed, and I can connect to you, like my soul was at the beginning. I'm still in God's thought, right?
But Shabbat is the connection.
Yeah, Shabbat is infused, that whole idea. Shabbat is what elevates the whole world, and everything we've touched and worked with in a productive way in the week now gets elevated, right? So that's why Jews are so obsessed with physical actions, because I said a blessing, and I'm drinking this, and I'm teaching some Torah, and we're learning Torah, and this coffee, which is mundane, neutral, has a spark of God's energy, which, if I do this correctly, now gets pulled into this space of holiness, and then on Shabbat gets lifted up to be reunited at the level of God's thought and returns to its source. And believe it or not, the spark of energy and all the beans and the milk and the cow and everything that went into this was destined for me to meet it, have a productive relationship, and consciously elevate it, and bring another piece of the world back to its highest state. Shabbat does that.
But we don't know why God stopped.
God felt like stopping.
Felt like stopping. Yeah.
It was complete, that's why.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
there you go.
Ki b'Shabbat hi aliyot ha'olamot limkoram chulu.
We can now,
Oh, that's me.
oh, it's you.
Yeah. For on Shabbat all the worlds ascend to their
There
source.
we go.
And this too is the time of the ascent of the soul to its source, which constitutes the act of teshuvah.
Right, so when God was saying, let there be a firmament and let there be creeping things, that was mundane speech. We think, God was creating a whole world, God, how spiritual and holy. For God, that was going out of God's normal oneness and creating mundane speech and creating things that seemed separate from God. And that's why, by the way, there's a practice on Shabbat for very observant Jews to not even talk about mundane things, right? Like because we want to imitate what God did, and God stopped using speech, which was mundane. Let there be this and that. So I wouldn't, if I was practicing that, sit at my Shabbat table and talk about the fence out in the yard, it's broken, or the traffic was so bad this week. Like, you actually try and reserve your speech to talk about people and connections and learning and stuff related to Shabbat, so that you imitate God and stepping back from that mundane speech. Uvifrat tefilot haShabbat v'dai lamevin.
The prayers of Shabbat in particular, even more than the weekly prayers, are an act of teshuvah ilah. They will suffice for the perceptive.
Right, so we just learned that prayer is the higher level tshuva that infuses this surrounding light into my own identity and makes me a vessel for this light that couldn't come into the world in any other way. Amazing. But that's prayer during the week. And then we learned that Shabbat is also the level of tshuva ilah, of return, higher return, because the whole world returns to its source. So now we know that when I pray during the week, that's like a little Shabbat each day. That's my Shabbat of that day, when I ascend and I become a Mishkan. So imagine now when those two things combine. And not only have I prayed during the week, and now I have the elevation of Shabbat, but now I'm praying on Shabbat, and I'm experiencing another level of the tshuva ilah, the higher level tshuva of prayer, within the already elevated world of Shabbat. So that obviously is a big kaboom during the week, and that should suffice for somebody that's paying attention, that if your soul wants to know why it came down and what the purpose of being a person in a life, that praying beautifully with joy on Shabbat and elevating everything you encountered, that's time, space, and consciousness coming together in the perfect way. So come, be here 7 o'clock tonight for a great Shabbat service with Noah Aronson and all these other people. It's going to be great. Tomorrow night. I keep thinking it's Friday. I'm skipping to Friday. ובזה יובן מה שכתוב, שובה אליי כי גאלתיך.
We can now understand the phrase, return to me, for I have redeemed you.
And so here this is Isaiah, and he says, Shuva alai, return to me, ki galticha, for I have redeemed you. So if I have redeemed you, why do you need to still return to me? Right? It should say, Shuva alai, return to me, because I will redeem you when you return to me. So once I've been redeemed, right? Once Galticha has happened and I've been redeemed, where am I supposed to return to, right? It really doesn't make linguistic sense. So the Alter Rebbe is pointing out what Isaiah was talking about was Ki Galticha, the redemption was already caused by our lower level of tshuva, right? Of apologizing and breaking my heart. Now, because I've caused Galticha by my lower level tshuva, now Isaiah says, now return to me, Shuva Elai, because now there's the higher level of tshuva, which is characterized by joy and by a much closer connection with God. Perush ki me'achar shemachiti cha'av peshecha hi ha'avarat hasitra achra.
For since, as in the preceding phrase, I have erased your sins like a thick cloud, removing the sitra achra.
Right, so Isaiah is saying, God has already removed my sins. I've already done tshuva tata. I've already reset my soul, so the sins are gone. U'gelticha min hachitzonim b'hit orarut rachamim elyonim bit aruta dil tata bit tshuva tata kanizkar la'el. Go ahead, Stuart, and I have.
Redeemed you from the evil, extraneous forces through the arousal of supreme compassion following the initiative taken by man below in his teshuva tata, as explained above.
Right, so we know that tshuva tata, lower level tshuva, that actually does redeem us. It does erase our sins like a cloud. So this all makes perfect sense now. Why still return to me even though I've erased your sins, I've redeemed you, I'm done, right? No, now return to me? Yes. Therefore, azai shuva elai b'tshuva ila'ah.
Therefore return to me with teshuva ilah.
So now we understand the depth and the quality of tshuva ilah, of higher level tshuva. It's not the kind of tshuva we think about where we're like, oh, I've sinned, oh, please forgive me, it's nothing to do with guilt, obviously, nothing to do with bitterness. It really has to do with intense joy, and it is a level of both by prayer and by learning Torah and doing mitzvahs with awe and love, and also by understanding the real meaning of Shabbat, which itself means tashev, return, that we can move from a sense that tshuva, that atonement is really, it's where we're serious and sorry and bitter, and we can move to a level of a return where we're celebrating and dancing, because what can make me more joyful than now being back at the level of reunited with God's breath within God, reunited at the level of God's thought, and we should be celebrating and doing that kind of tshuva.
On Yom Kippur, that we're doing tshuva.
It depends. Like probably at my level, I'm just doing tshuva tata all of Yom Kippur and hope I get it right. But there certainly are people for whom Rosh Hashanah really is crowning God King and doing tshuva, and then the 10 days of repentance are doing tshuva tata, lower level tshuva. And certainly at the Nila service, Nila in many places that practice this is actually quite an elevated, joyful. They'll finish by singing beautiful nigunim, and dancing in front of the ark, because they feel like now they're actually at the level of tshuva ilah. So it depends. We can look at how each day works, but I'll come back to the words of one of the Chabad Rebbes that when their son came in and asked, after Nila was done, what do we do now? He said, now we really start to do tshuva, right? So wherever it comes in our flow, that's the idea. And now the next two chapters, 11 and 12, talk about how to be in simcha during tshuva, tricks of the trade or techniques. So this really does wrap up the main theory, the main technique of our section, and we've got an understanding of both lower and higher level atonement. Any questions?
So I'm deep in studying Lamentations.
Uh-huh.
So that's teshuva tata, because he tells him to cry. And I was interpreting crying as he wants them to pray, but he really wants them to cry and accept responsibility for their sins.
Yeah, I'd say Lamentations is lower level tshuva, par excellence. That's
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
that nationally we left God, didn't fulfill our side of the bargain. There was this consequence, and now we're going to take very level-headed, serious responsibility for it and mourn as a nation and cry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Eleanor?
I did miss one session, so this might be because of that. In between adding prayer to Teshuvah Elah and Teshuvah Tata, that we talked about Teshuvah Elah without prayer and what it was and how. Why was that there, and how did it relate to adding prayer?
Because that is learning Torah and doing mitzvahs with love and awe. That is the primary way we do tshuva ilah, the higher level tshuva, right? And I'll put the classes out. There's a little editing process, so it's not out for you to catch up.
Yes, I know. I couldn't find them.
I'm sorry about that. We'll get there. Bleed edit. But because the intellect, as we learned in that class, because the intellect has an ability to connect with something outside myself, it has a natural quality of a surrender, right? My intellect can understand that 2 + 2 is 4, as I said, and that's not my opinion, it's not my feeling, right? That's just a higher reality. My intellect can connect with that. Whereas emotions has yeshus, has me. There's no bitul in emotions. Emotions, I love coffee, right? It's my feeling, right? A baby might not love coffee. So an emotion always fosters a sense of identity and ego. Intellect is able to have a quality that moves beyond that and surrenders with bitul. So if we want to connect with God's oneness through Torah and mitzvahs fully and have it flow fully into our being, so that's tshuva ilah, that's me being at the level of total oneness with God, I need to generate emotions that are intellectually based because they'll bring that level of surrender down into my emotional being, right? So that's why once I've done tshuva tata, now I'm going to say, let me connect with God. I'll open up a sefer, a book, start learning Torah. God's chokhmah is one with God. I'm flowing with that. But if I do it with love and awe that I've generated intellectually by saying, God's right here, this is oneness with God, God's aware of everything, and I'm flowing with that, and you have love and you have awe, now you can access a state of tshuva ilah, and that's the primary technique. That's really how we go about tshuva ilah. Then the Alter Rebbe said, there's another level, because when you're doing that, you're really relying on God's chokhmah and God's will to infuse you, but it's not because you're at that level, it's just because you're hooking onto God and getting your emotions to flow with that. So how do you now get your own emotions and your level? Now that's by prayer. That works on yourself. So that chapter really is the core and beginning of tshuva ilah. It's not just a little step.
Thank you. That was cleared it up.
Good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I learned Hebrew, but I have no idea what I'm doing. So when I pray, I should be doing it like in what I understand, like English, or do I make up my own thoughts? Or?
It's always a balance. The question is, many of us don't understand the Hebrew in the prayers we're saying, or some understand some of it, and it's obviously, if you want to pray in a way that you're emotionally connected, it's better to understand the meaning of the words. So you can go to the English translation, you can pray that, and I'm told on the highest authority that God understands English as well. So when I pray in English, it is legitimate prayer. In fact, in many ways, it's considered superior to praying in Hebrew if I don't understand the Hebrew writing. So both are good. So that might be a way, say the prayer for a few weeks in English and then come back to the Hebrew and connect it. There's great, if you look at the Mitsuda series of prayer books, they have the prayers written like 2-3 words at a time with the English right on the other side. So that's a good tool to just go through during the day and study, pick a little section and learn the English meaning of the Hebrew words, and that will get you to that level where you can go back to the Hebrew and be understanding what you're saying. But certainly that's a lifelong progress of knowing just the purest, the plain meaning of the Hebrew prayers is a good idea.
Emotion-wise, like what I've heard, that's why singing the prayers seems to get to me more.
Emotionally, for sure, I would agree. And so like finding a nice melody that suits you and singing sweetly, or being with a community that sings, with a lot of energy, that certainly is another tool. We've got lots of tools to keep elevating our emotional connection to praying.
The Torah text just does that for you.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? That's why I keep saying I love it so in class whenever we're in. I've always attributed it to a literary, style. The style was just so fantastic. That one story informs another, one word appears somewhere else, you use a word 7 times, and God is saying, pay attention, The way it speaks to you, I've always just assign that to a literary level, but it's really more than that, and that's where you get, to me, where you get some of the amazingness, aside from the ideas and stuff. It's just the way, the structure is really, pushes that forward, I think. Like the shalom, the broken vav in shalom and Pinchas.
I think both are true. I think
Yeah.
I think on the one hand we're learning Torah is God's chachma, and that is never separate from God. So I'm not reading a book that God wrote. I'm reading God in book form. This is still God. I don't pray to the book, but it's not separate from God like if I wrote a book. So wow. Right now, God's in my mind. God's words are coming out of my mouth and out of your mouth. That's pretty awe-inspiring. But also, God had people like you in mind when God wrote it in such a beautiful literary form, knowing, Noreen is going to really dig this, and this is going to speak to her, and it's going to inspire her. It doesn't necessarily inspire everybody else the same way it inspires you. You have a very appreciation of literature.
Yeah.
And so God made it in the most beautiful way and wove this tapestry of words in a way that would also inspire you. And that was God knowing your soul, right? So the whole thing, every part of it elevates.
It's really quite amazing,
Yeah. All right. Yeshakol, everybody. We'll continue with the last 2 chapters, but pleasure having you here. If you'd like to be with us, please email Maya at temple-israel.org, and we'll send you the class schedule. We'd love to have you. Have a wonderful week and an even more wonderful Shabbat.